Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel. I'm the events director for Legal Mile. This is Azhar, our founder. And this is we're very happy to host this webinar with our speaker, Sophie Shaw, a trainee at BCLP. I'll give Azhar the floor to kind of give you an introduction of Legal Mile first, if that's okay, Azhar?
Yep, sure. So hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar with Sophie Shaw today. It's great to see everyone here, about 30 people plus today. So the Legal Mile, we are a student-based network. We have a team of law students and aspiring solicitors as well. So I'm a non-law student, so quite a diverse team. And we are looking to bring as much information to everyone on ways to get like a training contract and supporting your career towards your legal journey. So we've been hosting a whole lot of events, and we also have our newsletter out today. So if you check our LinkedIn, we have a few articles, 3 articles, and it's a good newsletter. So I would recommend you to check us out on LinkedIn if you haven't already. And I'll give the time to Lavanya.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. Before we kick off with Rachel, who's done a brilliant job getting Sophie Shaw, and thank you, Sophie, again for really attending. As I put it, we are interested, and well, we're trying to be extremely altruistic here in helping everyone get a training contract, and we follow the principle of free access to understanding what it takes, free access to understanding the materials you need, and free access to, well, you being you and getting a training contract because you're you, essentially. Yes, but we do have certain things that we are bringing to the network. We have new partnerships, newsletters, etc. And that's for the sidelines. So I think now it will be perfect to let Rachel and Sophie take it away. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. So today's event is going to be about interviews and assessment centers. We'll be running these these themes around February and March because we know this is probably the time where you're going to be hearing back from your law firms. So we're really happy to have Sophie Shaw with us today. If I give the floor to her to give her sort of an introduction, and then we'll get started. Sophie?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I was worried that it might just be me and the Legal Mile team. So I'm really pleased to see quite a few of you here, which is fab. So in case you don't know, I'm a trainee at the moment. So I'm training with BCLP. I'm in my 4th seat, and in a few weeks' time, I'll be qualifying into the restructuring and insolvency team, which is very exciting. But it has been quite a long road, and it did take me a little while to get here. Like many of us, I haven't had a traditional route to law, so I did a business degree at undergraduate level. I then did the GDL, took myself off to do that. I then paralegaled for a little while. I spent some time doing marketing whilst I was making my training contract applications. So naturally, what I thought was going to be quite a short time period actually turned into 3 years, sort of out of a legal role whilst I was making those applications. And finally got my training contract with BCLP back end of 2016 after doing a vacation scheme with them. So 2016 is sort of what I call my like breakthrough year, not to be dramatic, but I got 2 vacation schemes that year. So I've had 2 assessment centres, and I've been successful at both of them. And then I had the 1 final round at BCLP, and obviously was successful in that. So I am passionate about the fact that it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't take so long, and irrespective of what background we come from, we should all be really proud of our background and our differences and our unique qualities. And I think that's definitely something that's being more celebrated in the profession now, which is fantastic. You know, so much has changed in the last 5 years or so, but the ethos that the Legal Mile team have just described is very much what I would align myself with. I am socially mobile. I'm the first generation of my family to go to university, majority state educated, went to a brilliant uni, but it's non-Russell group. Law recruiters aren't really aware of it being a good uni or my degree being a good degree. Don't fit that cookie cutter mold of what you would perceive a law applicant to be, or at least what used to be perceived that way. So that's something I'm really passionate about, is sort of giving you guys the conviction and the confidence that whatever stage you're at and whatever your background is, you are a great applicant, or you have the potential to be a great applicant. And hopefully today I can share some of the things I've learned along the way. And you guys have submitted some amazing questions, so thank you so much for that. And we're going to try and get through as many of them as possible. We've been discussing just now that if we don't get through all of the questions, we will find a way to answer them, whether that's in a series of stories or a series of posts, or we do some sort of takeover. I know it's annoying when you've asked a question, it doesn't get answered. So we will try and find a way to do that. And if it's anything BCLP specific, please feel free to give me a message. I'm quite keen that my platform isn't specific to BCLP. That's why I don't focus it on my page, because I don't want it to just be the focus. I want anyone of any creed, whether you're doing training contract, whether you want to do SQE, whether you're an apprentice, whatever it is you want to do, to feel like they can glean something from my page. But if you do have any specific questions on BCLP, then always feel free to give me a message, or connect with me on LinkedIn or whatever. So yeah, I don't know if that's enough of an intro. Hopefully it is. And I don't know if you want to get started now, Rachel, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. She's covered all of the ground, so let's just jump right into it. I really like this first question because I recently had my first assessment center as well, and I didn't know what to expect. So someone asks, I've never attended an assessment center, so what is it like? Could you kind of talk about what it involves, and what your experience was like?
Yeah, absolutely. So for law firms, an assessment centre is normally there's quite a standard format to them. So the first part of your day is normally a written task. The written task, the content of it, will vary depending on the firm. So most firms will use a case study, which is suited to the type of work that they carry out. So for both of the assessment centres that I've been to, it has been centred around an M&A situation. So there's been two companies, you've given lots of information on those two different companies, and you need to make a recommendation as to what should be the target for the client. Now, I don't think you should get too hung up on what the specific scenario might be, but what they're testing in the written task, they're testing all sorts of written communication skills, analysing information, drawing conclusions. That's all stuff that you can do regardless of what's in the information provided and what those specifics are. So they're the big things to note. I think that they're testing how you can review that information as quickly as possible, pick out the key differences and analyse that information, and then crucially write it up in whatever it might be. So often it's a memo to your supervisor or even a memo to the hypothetical client. They want to see that you can structure like a cogent letter or memo with a logical order and a structure. It's normally really time pressured as well. So they're just testing how you can get through things at a quick pace and formulate your thoughts quite quickly. I think for most candidates, we're normally quite used to doing that from exams anyway. So for me, I think some too much straw can sometimes be put in that written task, and hopefully you guys will all handle it really well. So once you've done the written task, you then tend to move on to a presentation. The presentation might be a continuation of the written task. So you might have a partner from the firm that you give a quick presentation to, 5-10 minutes, on what your outcome of the written task was. So why you decided to make those particular recommendations. That's what has happened in both of my assessment centres. And I personally think that's a little bit easier because you've sort of already gone through the time thinking out what you're going to say in that presentation, essentially. So obviously what the primary thing that the firm is testing there is you communicating well verbally, having confidence, just presentation skills in general. I've talked about this on my page before. I think it is something that people can struggle with if it's not something you've done a lot, but it's something you can practice really easily. And whilst we're all at home now all the time, if you have got any assessment centres coming up, definitely have a look on YouTube and Eventbrite, things like that, to get those presentation skills going. So that's the first two parts of the day. And then the third part is normally some sort of group task. Now, both of the group tasks that I've had at the assessment centres that I've been to have been negotiation-based tasks, which I absolutely loved. I think I've really enjoyed both the assessment centres that I went to, but I think the negotiation part is really fun. I think there's a few things to bear in mind so that you come across well, but I think ultimately there's nothing really you can do to prepare too much for that scenario, because you're responding to the people that you're in the task with. I would just say to bear in mind obviously assessment centre 101, don't be too domineering, don't be too aggressive, but equally you need to speak up, because if you don't take part, they can't assess you. So it's normally just about, in terms of, you know, your approach and how you position yourself in the group, making sure that you're contributing but level-headed, being conscious of covering all the ground in the time that you've got, things like that. I think we're going to cover that in a bit more detail later on, but they're the 3 tasks that you can normally expect at an assessment centre. Depending on whether you're applying for a vacation scheme or a training contract, you might have an interview built in as well. So if you're applying for a vacation scheme, most firms would structure it such that you do the 3 elements, you go and do your vacation scheme, and then you have your final round on the vacation scheme, so your final interview. If you're having a training contract assessment centre, you will likely have the 4th element of the day as an interview of some sort. So it's kind of everything at once. So yeah, that's what you can expect. The content obviously varies massively in terms of what you'll be reading and what the negotiation task will involve. The actual materials you're given will depend on the firm, but that's sort of the general structure you can expect.
Really great answer. Thank you, Sophie. Just a really quick follow-up. I think someone, privately messaged Lavanya saying, so would you say there is a standard structure that we should focus on? I think they're talking about the written task. So like how you write the memo. I don't think a lot of students are familiar with memos yet, I think. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I would just imagine, if you haven't had an office-based job before, I would just try and imagine that you are put yourself in a completely different zone than education. So it shouldn't be verbose, it shouldn't be wordy. In your memo, you want to be as brief as possible, be really concise and to the point and direct. Don't think about academic flowery language, just think about plain language. Depending on what they ask you to write, obviously the structure will change. So if it's it probably won't be a letter, it'll probably be a memo, but you should just say to whoever it is, supervisor, blah, blah. Have a brief intro, which is, I've been asked to look at whatever the task is, and my recommendations are below. You don't have a lot of time to make this like the most perfect memo in the world, the most perfect letter in the world. So just whatever logical structure works for you. And then the actual body will obviously depend on your thoughts and your feelings on the case study. So for me, one approach that I recommend to people and that I did in my assessment centre, and it's worked, is to structure into different pillars of thinking. So normally in an M&A scenario, I have sort of like 3 pillars. So you'll have like commercial factors as to why you might want to take one company over the other. You'll have legal factors if you've done the GDL or something like that, for example. If you haven't, then obviously you wouldn't talk about that. And then sort of like geopolitical, because I think I've had assessment centres where one target might have been based in Russia, for example, and the other target is based somewhere in Europe. And just whatever conclusions you might draw, as you're going through the materials, you should be thinking, what are some broad themes that I can break my memo down into, and just go through those in your memo. Sign off really briefly and just remember to keep professional, and just say, oh, if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to follow up, that kind of language. But overall, I wouldn't get too caught up on making sure there's like a really beautiful structure, because you're not going to have time. I would just find a structure, some subheadings that you can use, and those subheadings will allow you to sort of get a natural flow to the memo. Memos aren't, they're not particularly structured. Memos are just like, here's some information. So it's really up to you how you would like to structure it.
Absolutely. I think a good way to practice, if I could just add on to that, I think a good way to practice is kind of reading, a news story from Financial Times and kind of writing a quick summary, and then identifying all your issues and sort of an issues list. That will give you some practice for the written task, because it's going to be, they're going to give you some written, some piece of paper with all the information, and you have to summarize it. Just a really quick segue that we at Legal Mile, we really try to structure our newsletters in that format, so you get your news really, really structured, and you can get an idea of what a memo kind of looks like. So if you want to you could check that out. But we'll continue on. Next question is, how can we prepare for assessment centers?
How can you prepare? So I'll be honest, I personally don't think there's a huge amount in terms of like specific prep. When you've got an assessment centre booked in, specific prep you can do in that time. I think your approach your mindset about the assessment centre is the key thing. And just like in your day-to-day life, acquiring skills and practicing things is more helpful. So say, for example, with the written task, I've got no doubt that, you know, everybody's university educated that would be or has gone through some sort of rigorous process like an apprenticeship that would be going through an assessment centre. So I've got no doubt that your written communication skills are great. I think the only thing that commercial awareness, if you're reading the materials and things aren't jumping out to you, then that's the only thing I think you could potentially work on in the longer term. You know, it's not something that's just going to come like that if you've got an assessment centre booked in, but it's getting used to that analytical thinking and obviously engaging with the press, just doing what you would normally do in preparing for your applications, keeping up to date with current affairs. When you're reading things, engaging with them and trying to draw out what the key issues are. If you're well informed and if you're, you know, interested in the commercial world, then you would hopefully read through the information and be like, oh, that seems like it might be relevant. That seems like it might be relevant. But I don't think there's a huge amount you can do to prep. Again, the key thing is your communication style in your writing and also the time pressure. Obviously things are held virtually now, so that might be something that you would like to factor in, how you might, so in person I would use highlighter pens obviously to like highlight the information. There might be something practically that you would like to think about in terms of how you would, you know, sort of read and assimilate that information. But I don't think there's too much you can do for that. The presentation, again, if it's something that you don't feel particularly confident in, then I would just recommend to practice. I know it's a bit cringeworthy, but do just practice with friends and family and just ask for their feedback. Just getting used to it. I think the worst thing is if you've just never really presented before and then you get into the room and that's when you're more likely to just not feel as confident or to potentially get flustered. If it's something that you do a lot, then that's unlikely to happen. So I would just practice as much as you can. And again, make use of like whatever stage you're at. If you're studying still, for example, make use of your career centres. They're normally really good at giving practice assessment centre sort of sessions, and we'll be able to give you some pointers on presenting. And then the group task, again, I don't think there's too much that you can prepare for, because it's more just about you and your personality and positioning yourself in the group. Anything could come up, obviously, in the task. So I don't think there's a huge amount you can do to prepare, other than just to keep those things in mind. Like your mindset, you want to make sure that you're being level-headed, reasonable. A negotiation isn't about absolutely steamrolling the other side. You want to make sure there's a good flow back and forth of everybody raising their points, trying to reach consensus on the issues that you've been given. If you can't reach consensus, that's fine. Just couching it, moving on, trying to revisit it at the end, keeping an eye on time to make sure that you cover everything you've been asked to cover. If there's a deal to be struck, making sure you strike a deal. Obviously that sounds silly, but people just run out of time and don't actually manage to come up with any sort of deal and potentially get marked down on that. It's nothing, you know, fundamental that I think you can really do to prep. And sometimes with assessment centres, it's just about going to your first one and you realise that it's just drawing out different skills and just ultimately just being yourself. And I think people that perform the best at assessment centres are just people that are able to control the nerves as well as they can, that are friendly, polite, professional, personable, and enthusiastic, and just performing well in the task isn't something that I've got any doubt that any of you would do. It's more just about your mindset and feeling confident, and prep helps people in that, I think. So that would be what I would say.
Completely agree on that. It was definitely nerves that got the best of me. As long as you guys prep, there's no doubt you can get through this. Really quick follow on. Eve McCormack asks, how long do you usually have for the written tasks? I think this is usually like 30 to 45 minutes. Would you agree, Sophie?
Yeah, I can't hugely remember, and I think obviously it depends on how much information you're provided with, because if you're provided with little or a lot, then you're going to have more time. From memory, I think we were given a bit of a pack of information. It was quite a lot of information, and given an hour to read through it all and write a memo. It's not going to be hours, it is time pressured. So yeah, I would say it would vary between 30 minutes and an hour.
Yeah, really great. All right. Next question. Someone wants to know, what types of case studies have you encountered? Are they all M&A related? I think you touched on this briefly, but any experiences from other assessment centers?
So the two assessment centres that I've been to were both M&A based, the case studies. I think that might be my personal opinion. I think that might be because that's potentially a topic or a scenario that a lot of people are familiar with just from the press. People are aware of the concept of mergers and acquisitions and just might be more familiar with that context. I have heard of people going to assessment centres and potentially there being like a property scenario, commercial property acquisition or release in their task. It's not something that I've encountered. Again, the content will normally vary depending on what firm you're applying to. And out of sort of me and everyone I know, we've applied to large commercial firms. So a corporate case study seems to make sense. But your firm will also, if you've got an assessment centre with a firm, they'll also be able to advise and give you just a very, very basic one-liner on what it will involve.
Yeah, because I had my assessment center recently, if I could just add on to that, M&A is a good base knowledge because you literally need to know every department in the firm. So just know about that and then see how each department can help in that case study. And I think you do fine, regardless of what the case study would be about. Someone asks anonymously, I was wondering if Sophie would have any advice as to how to approach particularly difficult people during a group exercise. Thoughts?
This is obviously, I mean, I think what I would say is dealing with difficult people can come up in any walk of life, and it just depends what your approach would be. For me, I would always just bear tact and diplomacy in mind. Like at an assessment centre, you are being constantly observed, even if it's sort of virtually, obviously. So you just want to try and respond in as tactful as way as possible. It would be unlucky if you were dealing with somebody that was really behaving poorly, because obviously everybody wants to do well on the day. So hopefully that wouldn't happen for you guys. But if there is a difficult personality, depending on what it is, I would just advise to say, for example, if the difficulty is they are steamrollering the debate and they're just shouting over other people, I would just say, oh, just don't interrupt them, but just say, oh, thanks very much for that. I actually think we were talking about some interesting points in the prep. Is it all right if we just slightly move on and just bring up these points that we'd, just think normally. Like, don't try not to think of it as a vacuum. Just try and think how you would respond in real life. The lawyers that are observing you and HR that are observing you will be thinking themselves like, oh God, this person's being a bit whatever. So just deal with it tactfully and just try and nip it in the bud. At the end of the day, that person's the only person that's going to come off poorly because of it. So just maintain your professionalism and you'll be fine.
That's really, really great advice. I think that's exactly what I did. So how did you tackle the negotiation exercise? I think, yeah, BCLP has a negotiation exercise, right? Are there any specific steps to negotiating that you can share?
Well, I think I just touched on a few of them, but I think with your negotiation exercise, you've got your brief. So say, for example, if there's 4 of you in each room, there's going to be 2 pairs, and one will have one brief and one will have the other, and they're going to be completely opposing briefs. It's going to be very clear as you get into the task negotiating that you're not going to be able to reach consensus on all the points, because you'll have been told in your notes you absolutely cannot budge on X, and they'll have been told you absolutely cannot budge on Y. So that's something to bear in mind. When you're in your prep time, go through the task and make a list of all the non-negotiables. Like if it says you cannot accept a price lower than blah, blah, you can't let this person go, or whatever it might be, they're your non-negotiables. And if they come up in the negotiation, you need to look down that list straight away and be like, I'm really sorry, we can't concede on that point. Is there another point that we can move on to that might sweeten the deal somewhat for you? But on the flip side, but in a similar vein, you also want to be starting to try and think of points that you could concede in your prep time. So as you're going through it, your information that you've been provided will probably say at points things like, ideally your client would like X, but it could compromise on this. So you want to be making a list of points that you could concede on. And if the other duo or the other side are saying, oh, well, what about X? Are you able to do anything about that? You already know that you can budge on those. So in your prep time, it's just good to be thinking about those sorts of things. And then that's as best prepared as you can be for the negotiation, really. And again, I would just say it's about those other things, like actively listening to the other people, making sure that you're not just waiting for your turn to speak. You need to listen to what they're saying and respond appropriately. So actively listen, make notes if you need to, show that you're, enthusiastically, actively listening to them. Be a really good team player. So you need to make sure that as a duo, or as however many of you are, you're all managing to speak, you're all including each other, you're not talking over each other. As against the other people, obviously, as I said, don't be aggressive, don't be bullish, just try and be really polite, level-headed. Negotiation doesn't equal argument, it's just a conversation about what your client's needs and requirements are, basically. So that would be my best advice. I don't think in terms of a structure it would just massively depend on what's contained in the information in the brief. So in terms of there's no specific structure that I would particularly say is helpful or that I would suggest. I just think it's more about taking those things into account.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, thank you for that. There is another question here, would be sort of, everyone wants to know, how can you stand out at an assessment center? What do you think?
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, I think the people that stand out in the assessment centre are the people that have managed to get their nerves under control to a point where they're able to just try and let their personality come through on the day. I'm always impressed now by applicants that are friendly. It honestly, a smile goes so far. Just friendly and personable and approachable. Sometimes when we're nervous, we can be really, really uptight and shy, and it's quite hard for you to sort of see the personality in that person. So that goes a really long way. I think, like I said, we're saying people that perform well in assessment centres are people that are just polite, professional, level-headed. There's no magic or mystique or alchemy to it. I think it's just about showing those core competencies and communicating well in a written and verbal setting, being a good team player, involving everybody. It's those sort of softer attributes, they're not testing technical knowledge at these things because there could be plenty of people from a non-law background. So I think that would be my top tip on how to stand out. I know it's easier said than done because I know it can be really hard to control your nerves, but I've got no doubt that it's doable because I've done it and people do it. So whatever technique works for you, and I've suggested a few on my page previously, just try to get those nerves under control, try and be as confident as you possibly can, and just let your personality come through. Those are the people that stand out.
Really great answer. Thank you, Sophie. This kind of leads us into our next question, but we've already kind of covered this. What are the assessors looking for? So I would say, based off your answers, you would think how you work under pressure, how fast you can read information and analyze information, and how you work in a team. But I think most importantly of all, staying calm in this stressful situation. Would you agree, Sophie? Anything to add?
Yeah, definitely agree with all those core competencies and all those softer skills, definitely. But I think in terms of what else the assessors are looking for, it's going to massively depend on the firm itself, because what the firm will have is a scoreboard of its key attributes that it's looking for as they relate to the firm's strategy, its values, things like that. So what that, how you can prepare for that and how that will present itself is the firms that you're going to assessment centres for, simply look up their values and look up what their core strategic aims are, and then you can see very simply what they're looking for, because at a strategic level, GradRec will have consulted with the partnership on what they're looking for in the hiring, and it is always going to be, their value is going to reflect that. So that will obviously massively vary, but a lot of law firm values do tend to play into that. So it's being collaborative. They might say something like going above and beyond for our clients. So again, that's that real professionalism and going above and beyond in terms of with your group and really including everybody. So that's the only other stuff I would say that they would be looking for at an assessment centre. Again, it's just going to vary as to what that particular firm is looking for. But there's definitely ways that you can think about those attributes and what you might possess, and then almost play a bit of word bingo. That's what I always call it. It's just make sure you're dropping in these key phrases and these keywords that are like letting them know, yep, I'm aware of what your core values are. I'm aware of your strategy. I'm aligned with it because here's how I'm showing these attributes. They're the only other things that I would say. So again, it's obviously going to be part of your research to research the firm and what its values are. So hopefully that'll be helpful.
Really great answer, Sophie. Thank you very much. Someone said, being a non-native speaker, how should I react if I am losing my words? So this actually ties into one of our questions during our interview section, as in like tips for if my mind goes blank during an interview. What should we do?
Yeah, so I think in terms of if your mind goes blank, I actually wouldn't be too worried about that unless it's something that you know is potentially a problem for you in general in life. Because obviously, I think when I think about scenarios where your mind goes blank, it's normally quite introverted, like in an exam. In the assessment centre, you're constantly with other people who you've got to bounce off. So hopefully your mind wouldn't necessarily go blank. It's more likely that you lose your train of thought whilst you're speaking and things like that. And again, the main thing there, I think, is just stop and take stock, take a breather, and then just take a few beats to collect yourself together and try and calm down and just create a new like thread of thought. It's about people, you know, are potentially going to get a little bit flustered at points in an assessment centre, but it's about how you rebound from that. And as we were discussing, that reacting well under pressure, that's all part of it. So I wouldn't, you know, it happens, it's normal, it happens to a lot of people. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about if it does happen. If you do find that your mind goes blank, again, like I say, just take a breather and do all those things, try and calm yourself down, recognize that it's normal and that it happens, and just try and, for me, like something I talk about on my page is a hook. This is something that I do just in general in life, like so many different settings. Even like if you have a social setting and you get social anxiety, imagine how you're going to arrive at the venue, what the first thing that you might say will be, and just get your mind in the zone. If you're in the interview room or if you're in the group task or whatever and your mind goes blank, just say, just address it, just be like, oh, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. And maybe you'll thought of a hook for that particular part of the day, like the partner interview, for example. You could think of a sentence in advance or an issue you want to discuss in advance. And if you lose your train of thought, you could say, oh, sorry, I think I've just might have lost steam on that point. But one thing I did really want to talk to you about today was X issue. And although you've sort of gone off topic, you've got the conversation going again. And chances are when the conversation gets going, you'll remember what you wanted to say previously. So it's just about having coping mechanisms in place. It might happen and that's okay. It's just about how you respond to it. In terms of being a non-native English speaker, if you get flustered, again, I think it's the same point. It might happen and that's absolutely fine. And your interviewers are going to be very, very experienced people that have seen people from all walks of life and all creeds. And so they are probably going to be cognizant of the fact that you're not a native speaker. And they'll probably say, it's okay, don't worry, just take a second, just take a breather, and you just collect yourself and just calm your nerves. Just try not to be too concerned would be my main advice on both of those issues with it happening, because it's totally fine and totally normal. People recognise that assessment centres are stressful days and our nerves can get to us. So it's all about how you respond to it. It's not about the fact that it's happened being an issue.
Really great. Thank you very much. So our next question is sort of, how can you prepare for interview questions?
Interview questions. So if we're talking about, it depends what interview we're talking about, because some firms will have, none of the interviews I've had have been competency based, but some firms will have some competency sort of questions, or a HR interview as well as a partner interview. So for me, I think my firm was happy that they'd covered off the competency stuff in the application form and in the sort of, they were assessing the skills they wanted to assess in the rest of the day. If it is going to be a HR interview, in terms of how to prepare, again, you want to like live and breathe by those firm values. You want to really deeply research what the values and the strategy are. Out of the values and the strategy, try and extrapolate competencies and attributes that you would relate to those if they're not like explicit. And you want to think of example questions, and again, there's loads online. Like if you Google this, you'll find loads. What might also be a good thing to do that I've done in the past is have that list of like those attributes and ask family and friends to look at the list and think of questions as well, because obviously when you're trying to think of them, it can be a bit difficult. But get other people to ask you some sample questions, and they might ask you one that you're just like, oh. But again, it's good practice just to think on the spot and not to flap and not to get flustered. In terms of partner interview, my partner interview wasn't competency based at all. It was very much a chat. It was a chat about me, my experiences, why I wanted to be a commercial lawyer, why I wanted to work at the firm. So I don't think there's a huge amount you can do to prepare for that, except to be able to really emphatically and eloquently verbalize what those things are. So that's always going to come up. Why law and why the firm? And you really need a logical flow and structure to be able to speak very strongly to those 2 points. Is the only things that I really think you can prep, because the rest of it, anything can come up because they're just chatting about you, and obviously you know you, and that's fine. So you should be able to just be able to speak to those points. I've talked about it on my page, but in terms of why law, I would say there's 4 sort of things that you want to be addressing. So what first sparked your interest in law? Did you study law at A-level? Did you do work experience? Were you inspired by somebody you met? Were you at university and you went to a careers fair and you spoke to a law firm? Like, it doesn't have to be anything big or major, but what first sparked your interest? Number 2, what have you done since then to explore that interest? So, you did work experience at a law firm and you really enjoyed it. The second step is you sort out law firm networking events and open days, for example. So it's explaining, this is the spark, this is how I've built on it since and what I've done. The third step is, what have I enjoyed about those experiences? So it's not enough to just say, I became interested in law because of X, and I then carried on exploring it by doing Y. It's how have those interactions then shaped you and further compounded your interest in the law. And the fourth step is, how are you demonstrating commitment to the profession? So it's a vocation for life for many of us, and it's a very rigorous application process. And you need to be able to show that this isn't just a flyaway whim. It's like not enough to have just over the space of a couple of weeks or months to be like, I think I might give it a go. You need to be able to show the story and how it's developed. So that would be my top tip. And then in terms of the firm, obviously you're going to have your own personal reasons for why you've applied to the firm. I always think it's really good to, again, explore certain key areas. So for me, the 4 key areas are the people. That's the biggest, most important thing for me. It's the culture and the atmosphere, the type of place you want to work. You'll only know that if you've spoken to people at the firm, and hopefully you will have done, and hopefully you will have spoken to all sorts of different people from the firm, by speaking to trainees over LinkedIn, by going to networking events and speaking to associates and partners, by going to formal open days, for example. You want to think about the type of work the firm does. If the firm doesn't do the type of work you're interested in, then that's your career. Your career's set. The path is set based on the firm you train at. So you need to develop a really strong knowledge of the key core practice areas that the firm undertakes, and its clients as well. So its clients are obviously going to shape your practice massively, because public or private clients, and then in terms of, is it big retail investment banks, is it funds, all those sorts of things are going to massively shape the type of work and the key asset classes that the firm operates in relation to. And then 4 is like other, and I don't mean that to sort of minimize it, because it's just as important, but it's just going to be driven by what you care about. For me, it was CSR initiatives and pro bono. I'm still carrying on a lot of pro bono projects that initially I was involved in on the LPC. So I advise Reprieve, human rights charity. It's an amazing sort of rolling scheme that the firm's got. And we send people on to comment there. So that was one of the things that really appealed to me in terms of inclusivity, the fact the firm was managed by a woman, the fact that we have really good gender statistics. Those are things that I cared about, but obviously it's going to massively vary depending on what your particular passions are. So those are the approaches I would recommend for those 2 questions. That's how I would recommend you prepare for the partner interview. In terms of, competency interview versus partner interview, you might get a mix. So I do think it's good to just cover your bases and prepare on the competency side and some of those core questions that you might get asked by partners as well, just so that you feel as confident as you can.
Yeah, thank you. That was very detailed explanation of kind of motivational questions. Someone here asks, how do I communicate my work experience effectively in an interview? I've got good work experience, I just struggle to get this across. Any tips?
Okay, so with your work experience, I wouldn't even, like, if you've got great work experience, awesome. But you know, anything can count. I think what you always want to be thinking about, even whether it's like part-time jobs, retail bar work, whatever, volunteering roles, full-time, you know, work, everything. If you've got great work experience, that's awesome. But, you know, also cast your net as wide as you can. What you want to be thinking about is, it sounds obvious, but the transferable skills that you've gained from that. So that is something that you can subtly weave into your responses to other answers as well. So in terms of communicating it effectively, you want to be able to show to the interviewer, whether it is GradRec, HR, or the partner, what you've gained from those experiences that make you a good trainee. So it's, again, just thinking about core competencies and what do people look for in trainees generally? You want somebody that is obviously very bright. You want somebody that's good with people, a good communicator, great attention to detail. Just think about those things and then come up with specific examples. Just have a bank of examples of what you've done in your work experience, and hopefully you'll just be able to weave into your answers some of those really specific ways in which you've you know, your work experience has helped you. And again, if it works for you, it's not something I particularly followed, but a lot of people use the STAR technique and things like that in responding to answers. So definitely look up some of those techniques. And then hopefully if you bring up your work experience and follow that structured approach, if that works for you, then you'll be really demonstrating what you learned in that work experience that's of use. So yeah, those would be my tips.
Thank you very much. I think usually what people would say would be the STAR approach, but I think a really good way to make yourself stand out is to put in that last sentence saying, how would you apply this if you were a trainee?
Yeah.
That's the method that I would use. So next question, do you have any tips on how to approach video, like virtual interviews? And yeah, let's go with this one first. Yeah, any tips on virtual interviews?
Yeah, so I mean, it is different. It is weird. Obviously, we're all having to adapt to it. I just did my NQ interview via video, so I sort of was in a similar position a few months ago. In terms of how you would approach a video interview, I personally don't think you should approach it any differently than you would a normal interview. All the same stuff applies. Dress professionally, but dress in a way that makes you feel confident and comfortable. Try and get your personality across. Obviously, it's a little bit different over video because body language can play quite a lot into that. But just make sure that my frame here isn't brilliant because it would probably be a bit further in. But just make sure that you're upright, you're nodding, you're enthusiastic. You're not like this or whatever. Just make sure that you're presented well. Make sure you're confident in terms of your tech. So try the link in advance. Try and make sure you're in quiet surroundings and your Wi-Fi is okay. Obviously, we've all been dealing with working from home now. People are aware that internet can drop in and out and stuff like that. That's fine. It happens. Don't get flustered by that. But other than that, I wouldn't say that anything should really be hugely different. Again, it's just about trying to build that rapport with your interviewer, being like gesticulating, just being like quite engaged, making eye contact. So when I had my NQ interview, I actually didn't look into the camera because I was trying to look at the partners. So I had like me, partner 1, partner 2, partner 3. So I was trying to look at them all and look in the eye of the camera. That's just what I did because I find it quite weird to just stare in one place all the time. Some people just like to be able to look directly into the camera and that works for them. Again, I would just have a practice, just like set up a Zoom with a family member or a friend and do a little practice interview. Definitely consult your career service if they've got one. They might be able to give you some feedback on whether they thought it was an effective video interview. One thing that's really good is that obviously now you can have notes around. So in my NQ interview, I had sticky tabs absolutely bloody everywhere, like everywhere. And again, that just mitigates in case your mind does go blank. I didn't use them, but it was nice to know they were there just in case your mind does go blank. So that's an amazing tool you can make use of now. You wouldn't have been able to have that before. So definitely just have some prompts around you. Don't feel like you need them there to rely on them, but just in case, you can have some key words and phrases in case things go off track. But yeah, I would just try and be yourself as much as you can. I know it's weird being on video, but everyone's in the same boat, and obviously people are aware that it's different. So your interviewer is going to be accommodating for that as well. So just try and be yourself and just be personable as much as you can be. And I think it'll be absolutely fine.
Brilliant. This actually ties into the next question. Don't know if you have anything more to add to that, but how can you best showcase your personality via video interview?
Yeah, I think it's just literally everything that I was just saying, just the body language, just working on that, making sure that you're actively, when somebody else is speaking, you're actively going like this, yeah, trying to make eye contact, just all those sorts of things. It's all we can do at the moment, really, isn't it? I wouldn't treat it too differently from an in-person interview. Just be as you would be anyway.
Brilliant. Next question is, did you know during the interview that you had performed well?
No, not at all. When I was at assessment centre, I thought it was going well. I was enjoying it, and I was like, yeah, I think this is going well. The partner interview, I had no idea, and I actually left my partner interview really upset because it all went really, it was all really nice. We were having a great chat, and it just went like that. And after it, I was like, that was just a chat. Like, I didn't sell myself. Like, it wasn't like hard. I've just wasted the opportunity. What have I done? And then obviously it worked out fine and I got the job, but it was just so relaxed, and we were just having, like I say, a chat about me and about them and their work and things like that. So I had no idea how it was going during it. I didn't think it was going well, but I didn't think it was going badly. So I wouldn't have been able to speculate either way. And I think most people would be the same. You're so in the zone in the interview, you don't really know. So no, I didn't know it was going well, and I don't think you will either. So I would just.
I think like what they might mean is, would you think it might be a good idea to ask them for feedback about your interview? What do you think?
After the fact, yeah, definitely. But I mean, if you're successful, you'll get feedback. And normally, if you make it to final stage, you'll get feedback either way, even if you're unsuccessful, I would say. So yeah, definitely. If you don't get feedback, I would 100% ask for it, definitely. And they should be more than happy to give it to you if you've got to interview stage, yeah.
That's absolutely brilliant. All right, I know this question was very popular. What questions should I ask at the end of the interview?
Yeah, so I actually put something on my page the other day about this. This is, now that I'm on the other side of the table, this is one of my really big bugbears actually with questions, just because you get asked the same questions all the time. And where I think candidates really fall down is really generic questions. So it's all about how you phrase it, and just making sure that you're getting across to the person. You're not expecting the answer on a plate. You're actively interested and engaged. Sometimes I think people think they have to have a question, so they come up with a couple of questions just to ask them, and so they are generic and they're not really that. There's no point really. Good questions to me are going to be questions that, if you know who your partners are in advance in the partner interview, you could maybe do a bit of research on them and ask about their practice, for example. Although saying that, obviously you can get substitutions with your partners, so don't go to town with that. Good questions, I think, are always about, like, people want to talk about themselves. People love talking about themselves. So I think good questions are always about why your interviewers got into law, what it is that they're interested about in their practice. If they're an energy lawyer, why did they pick energy? What is it about that? What's their career highlight? What's one of their favourite deals they've worked on? Obviously, keep it all positive. Don't be like, what's the worst deal you've ever worked on? That type of stuff. It depends on who your questions are aimed at, I would say, as well. That's the type of stuff that I would ask partners. And if you're going to ask them something, I would keep it quite high level like that, and I would ask them, like, also broader or thematic issues like, oh, I've been reading a lot about, oh God, probably not this because everyone's talking about it, but if it's a commercial, a partner that works in commercial, I've been reading a lot about how COVID might affect force majeure clauses. Have you been doing much work on that? Like, is that something you've seen? You know, make sure if it's a commercial lawyer, if it's like a banking lawyer, then they're probably just gonna be like, not really. Like, so make sure it's tailored in that way. Or if there's something that you particularly care about, that you're particularly passionate about, like pro bono or like social mobility or something like that, just say, I'm really interested in it. Is that something you've been able to get involved in? Those kinds of questions, more specific. Questions that are good for grad rec as well, or things about the process and things about candidates. And is there a typical type of person that you recruit into this firm and that type of stuff? Good questions for trainees are going to be day-to-day life, like, oh, what seats have you done and why, and what did you enjoy, and what would you recommend in terms of like training contract? Would you keep it really broad or would you go niche? And what is it that you love about the firm? What's it like? Those sorts of things, you know, much more nitty-gritty for trainees. So I would just like try and prepare. You're not going to have loads of time most of the time, so I would try and prepare a handful of questions for a junior level, like trainees or associate, grad rec and partners. And then you've sort of got them ready. And if it is virtual, you can get right in there, like raise your hand and ask a question with your voice. I always recommend rather than typing it into the box if you've got the opportunity to. And just, yeah, just make sure you've got a wide bank of questions, basically.
Thank you very much. Right, very conscious of time. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get through all of these questions, but like Sophie said, if you're interested in a follow-up, let us know in the chat or DM us on Instagram. Obviously, follow Sophie. She has a lot more detailed information and tips and advice about assessment centers and interviews and everything else. So very great content. So make sure you follow her. Her Instagram, I believe, is shared in the chat right now. Right. I do want to talk a little bit about something very unique that our network Legal Mile offers. If I could get Lavanya to get on and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, hi everyone. Sorry, look a bit like a mess. But yeah, so one thing that our network is helping, other than helping you with, of course, you know, bringing great people like Sophie, talk about assessment centers, interviews and whatnot. What we also do is we have a brilliant partnership with CV Links. And if you go to our page, it's over there. And we've now introduced paid legal internships and paid work. So if you want to meet up your work experience section, that's exactly what we're doing. So our network's kind of, think of our network as your typical application page. We're helping you how to answer your questions, and now we're also beefing up your work experience and whatnot. So that's something unique to our network. And yeah, obviously you won't pay for it, but you will be paid for the work. So that's kudos to us kind of thing. Yeah, anything else to add, Rachel, Sophie?
Yeah. If you have any questions on that, just DM us, let us know, or we'll be happy to answer that. Sophie, is there anything else you kind of want to add?
Well, I would just say that we'll just sort of make a list of the questions that haven't been answered, and we'll just come up with either a follow-up session or we'll come up with some sort of way of addressing all those, because I know that we haven't been able to get through all of them. And as I said, if anybody's got any, I know that it's been quite general today, but if anyone's got any specific questions, then please feel free to get in touch with me, and hopefully we'll be able to do something similar like this again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. It's great to see so many today.
Absolutely, right on time. Thank you very much. And you guys can take off now. Any questions, obviously DM us on Instagram. We'd be happy to help. Yeah, have a good night or afternoon, sorry.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you to the attendees as well. Check out your Sophie's Instagram page and our LinkedIn page as well. And yeah, that would be great. End the record.